Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to this evening's session on ASAs, CLNs and SAFEs. I'm Sarah Turner and I'm joined as usual by Angel Academe co-founder Simon Hopkins and our network manager Michelle McQueen, and of course our brilliant speakers. As usual, to talk to us and ask questions, please use chat. Just a bit about us before we get going. So as most of you will know, you'll have heard me say over and over, Angel Academe exists to close the gender gap in startup investment. That's both the lack of funds going to female founders and the low number of women participating as angel investors. We've been doing this since 2014. In that time, we've backed 45 businesses, many of them through multiple rounds. So we have more experience than anyone at female investment in the UK. And we're soon about to announce 2 more investments. We've got International Women's Day coming up next week. So I've been doing some digging around in the stats for the various articles I'm writing and events that I'm speaking at. And the big difference since 2014, when we first got going, is that while people are certainly more careful about what they say in public, the dial hasn't actually moved that much in terms of action. Women are well represented, even in high growth, high tech entrepreneurship. So according to Bowhurst, 26% of businesses that qualify as high growth in their books have a female founder or co-founder. Yet, if you look at the middle box, 87% of all funding in Europe is still going to all male teams. And that's according to Atomico's annual State of European Tech report. And then the box on the right-hand side, on the investor side, do women owning half the wealth in this country? Only 14 of us are active as angel investors, and only 7% of us have invested in 10 or more businesses. So unlike men who tend to have much bigger portfolios and also invest bigger ticket size. And for the VC figure, very shocking, men still in Europe, so VC being the institutional investors. So to try and sum of that, what I wanted to create was an angel network that not only looked different and looked more diverse, but worked better for women as well as men who support our mission. We're targeting female founders, and we're also targeting more women as angel investors. Our collaborative and structured due diligence process is unique. Many of our members have stuck with us, so they seem to like it. We're not only the oldest and most active female angel-oriented network, but the most experienced now. Many of our investors have very large portfolios and are very generous in sharing their expertise, and likewise our partners. So what we're looking for in startup investments, move on to the next slide. Yeah. As angel investors, we're investing our own money, so we have quite a lot more flexibility than VCs do, but we still need return on investment. We don't need to target those very elusive billion-dollar exits, but we do need to see the ambition from founders to get to 100 million or more. So we're looking for founders who prioritize growth. They've also got to be comfortable giving up some control of their business to shareholders and also to co-founders and fellow team members. Options are a vital part of incentivizing those early employees. They also need to want to exit within a decent time frame, and they need to be building an innovative and defensible business. So that's enough about us. Just to move on to our speakers for this evening, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Audrey Mandela and Emer Hughes. Audrey has been an Angel Academe advisor and investor for many years, and Kingsley Napley and Emer have been advising us, as well as entrepreneurs, on startup investments since 2014. I'm going to hand over to them to explore everything that we need to know about these investment vehicles. Just a reminder to put all your questions in chat as we go along. We've got plenty of time to deal with those towards the end of the conversation. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Sarah.
I'm going to be asking Emer a number of questions. So to kick off, Emer, what the heck are all of these things? What do all these acronyms mean? What's the difference between them? Can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, and I'm going to just hopefully smoothly share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah,
Looks
okay,
good.
brilliant. So here we go. Now I'm hopefully going to be able to move on to my next slide. Okay, sorry. Just give me... Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, super. So in response to that question, I've created hopefully this helpful table, and I can just talk you through kind of the different elements. Firstly, I thought it would be helpful to just recap what an equity investment is, but hopefully you should all be familiar with this one. It's essentially when you invest money in return for shares in a company, and you agree the valuation for the company, which determines the subscription price, and then typically if it's going to be an SCIS or EIS eligible investment, you'll receive ordinary shares, and generally you'll go through the process of, before making that investment, you'll do due diligence into the company, and then on making the investment you'll sign your investment agreement, and there'll be articles of association, and they set out the rights and obligations that you have as an investor in the company. And a little plug for the last Ask Me Anything session that we did. We talked about some of those key rights for investors, which I believe is available on YouTube. So kind of bearing in mind that's what an equity investment is, we can then look at some of the alternative structures that you have to invest in companies. The first one to talk about is an ASA, or Advanced Subscription Agreement. So I'll probably use that term interchangeably. And this is essentially where the investor puts their money in now, but they're getting their shares at a later date. So it's going to convert into shares at a later date, typically and you'll have triggers as to when that happens. So it's going to typically be on the next funding round, or on a long stop date, or on potentially a sale or a listing, or a liquidation. So they'll, whichever happens first, essentially. And the price you'll get will, if it's on a funding round, will tend to be a discount to that funding round. And if it's on one of the other triggers, for example, a long stop date, there'll tend to be a fixed price there. And if you've structured it correctly, then your advanced subscription agreement should qualify for SCIS or EIS. And some of the key things to be aware of around that is, to be SCIS and EIS eligible, it can't be repaid, so it can't be a loan. You're putting your money in now and you can't get it back. Your ASA can't be varied or assigned. It can't bear interest, again reflecting that it's not a loan. And your long stop date has to be a maximum of 6 months. And in that agreement, you can't have any other benefits, such as other investor protections. So if you're going down the ASA route, then it's an investment. So as with your straight equity, you should be doing your due diligence into the company. On putting your money in, you're signing the advanced subscription agreement. But then once the conversion happens and you're getting your shares, you're going to be entering into the investment agreement, same way as you would with an equity. And so it's important, again, to look at those documents, the investment agreement, the articles, because that's what's going to apply when you do get your shares. And then the next kind of structure to talk about is convertible loan notes, or a CLN. And this is when an investor loans money to a company. So again, you're putting your money in upfront, and it's a loan, so they can charge interest. It's a loan, so it could be repayable, but it's a convertible loan, so it could also convert into shares, again on a trigger event, such as a next funding round, a long stop date, a sale, etc. And the price that you're going to get will be potentially a discount on the next funding round, or a fixed price that you've agreed. Because it's a loan, because it's, can be repaid, can charge interest, etc., it's not SEIS and EIS eligible. So convertible loan notes, particularly amongst angel investors, we used to see a bit off before the ASA kind of product was introduced, but now we don't really see it so much for kind of UK angel investors. It tends to be still a bit for kind of US investors or funds, but not typically for UK angel investors who are wanting to qualify for SEIS and EIS. And again, with the convertible loan notes, it's an investment like any other. So again, do your due diligence on loaning the money to the company. You'll be signing this convertible loan note, and but then should your loan convert into equity at that time, when you're getting shares, again, you'll be signing the investment agreement. So you'll want to be looking at that document and the articles of association, because those are the documents that are going to apply at that time. One thing which I haven't included in my table, but which was obviously in the title for this, is SAFEs.
I was just about to ask about that.
Yeah, haven't forgotten about them. So a SAFE essentially stands for Simple Agreement for Future Equity. And it's basically a US version of an advanced subscription agreement. So typically, if you're a UK angel investor and when you're wanting to get SEIS, EIS, you're not going to be looking at SAFEs. You'd use the ASA product. But you may come across them if, say, you're investing in a round where there are US investors, or you're not looking for that qualification. So yeah, kind of US version of ASA. So we won't really talk about it that much, but that's what that one is.
Great, thank you. Now, why would you use these instruments rather than have a priced round?
Sure. So we'll talk about some of the themes as to whether what I'm about to say is true or not, but generally, ASAs, convertible loan notes, are used as kind of bridging rounds, where a company is looking to get some money in quickly, to perhaps because they've got a larger investment round coming up, or they've got a kind of milestone coming up in the business, and they essentially need some runway to get to that point before they then do that larger round, or perhaps that milestone changes the valuation of the company. So typically, as I say, used as a bridging round to get to that next major stage.
Right. And so what would be some of the advantages? So for founders, we can see, get to that next stage. For investors, I assume there's the discount. What else?
Yeah. So completely right. For investors, it's going to be that financial advantage of having the discount on the next funding round, which is essentially the trade-off for the risk that the investors are giving by putting their money in early. I suppose if there is a bit of, let's say, healthy debate around valuation, then ASA's convertible loan notes, because the subscription price is a discount at the next funding round, you're essentially then, I suppose, letting the market help to put that valuation on there. And then I suppose for founders and existing investors, one thing you'll want to think about around valuation and the discount point is whether you have a floor essentially for what that price should be, because essentially you want to have some certainty around what what the fully diluted position is going to be and how much equity you're giving away. Potentially for investors, you might not, if you're a new investor coming in under an ASA, then you might not want a floor because you just want the full the discount. Other kind of things is that these products are seen as kind of quicker and simpler because particularly for founders, if it's seen as a sort of quicker way to get the money in. If you're doing an equity investment, then you've got investment agreement articles. These documents can be 20-30 pages long each. An ASA by comparison is probably 5 or 6 pages. So it's seen as it's a shorter form. It's seen as a quick way to get the money in. Obviously, as I mentioned, as the investor, you'd still obviously want to be looking at those other documents because that's what's going to apply to you when your conversion happens and you get the shares. Typically as well, if you did go down the convertible loan note route, then although they might not be SCIS or EIS eligible, there's benefits there that you can have that counteract your downside risk. So for example, you can charge interest on those, they can be repaid. So they typically tend to, as I say, be used by sometimes US investors or funds where they can put money into potentially an earlier stage business and protect their downside risk with some of those other terms.
Right. And what are the disadvantages?
Sure. So disadvantages, I suppose my first point there is it really quicker and simpler? As I said when we were talking through equity, ASA, convertible loan note, you're still making investment, so it's still going to be important to do your due diligence. I suppose if you're doing an ASA into an existing company, that could be a bit more light touch. It could be, or you might be comfortable not doing due diligence at all, but because you feel like you know what's been happening with the company. But obviously, if it's a company that you're newly investing in, doing it via an ASA or a convertible loan note shouldn't discount doing due diligence. Also, as I just mentioned, you'll still want to have a look at the investment agreement and the articles that will apply when your investment converts into equity. So again, although you might be signing up to the shorter form document, those longer forms, you're still going to want to look at them. You still might want to negotiate points on those. And then, so yeah, query sort of, is it really quicker and simpler? The other kind of risk, I suppose, for investors is that maybe those kind of longer form documents aren't in place yet. If this is the first external investment potentially that the company's had, then, and those documents aren't in place, then you're sort of putting your money in, and if it's an ASA, it can't be repaid, and you're not going to necessarily know what terms apply when that converts and what protections you're going to have as an investor. So there's some potential kind of lack of clarity around that. There's also potentially some lack of clarity around what's the price going to be. If you don't have a floor in there, then you're putting your money in, but you don't, and you're getting a discount, but you don't know what the price is going to be. So for potentially founders, for existing investors, they don't know how much they're going to be diluted by. So there's again some kind of risk around that for both sides. I suppose tied into that a bit is they're sort of seen as quicker and simpler, and maybe something that you can do without taking advice. But there's, I mentioned some of the key things to make an ASA, EIS or SCIS eligible. Not having investor protections in there, it having the 6-month long stop date. So although it may be seen as quicker and simpler, there's still a few kind of pitfalls. So it's important to make sure those documents are right if your investors are going to want to have SEIS and EIS. And also, again, because it's seen as maybe quicker and simpler, and there's that kind of, you know, you might just do an ASA here, a convertible loan note there, and then potentially your cap table is getting quite messy. You know, you've got a number of these convertible documents potentially on different terms with potentially different discounts and valuations apply, and so you know, you might not really have a clear idea as to what your fully diluted position is looking like. So that's just something to be aware of as well. And there's the other element of you've put them in place, but when you then do your funding around, these are all going to have to convert. So then all of that is going to need to be tidied up and picked up in the next funding round.
Yeah.
And then I suppose just the last point there was just the short period for conversion, particularly for ASAs. So some people may remember that when they first came out, the long stop date was 12 months, which, you know, potentially could be a sufficient amount of time to go out, find investors, go through due diligence, agree documents. But now, because that long stop date is 6 months, that's quite a tight period of time to do all that stuff. So actually, unless a company's already talking to those investors that's going to form their funding round, it could, you know, it could be quite a tight period, and so you could end up converting on, you know, the long stop date rather than the funding round if the funding round takes a bit longer. But on the other hand, for the person who's invested via the ASA, 6 months is a shorter amount of time to be in that limbo where you've put your money in, but you've not yet got your shares, and you've not got the investor protections that you might have under those investment documents.
Yeah. So if you're presented with one of these documents, or if you're a founder and you're thinking about going this way, what are some of the key points that you should be considering?
Yeah. So again, got another little slide on this. You think we planned this?
You would think that.
So I suppose there are a few key considerations to think about. We've already kind of touched on some of these. Firstly, when it converts. So you've talked about, you know, we've talked about it converting on a funding round, but sometimes there's a distinction between, say, a qualifying funding round or a non-qualifying funding round, and that essentially, to be a qualifying funding round tends to be you've raised X amount of money. You know, there's also, does it converting on the long stop date, making sure you've got that 6 month time limit if it's an ASA, and then there could be other conversion events such as sale, listing, liquidation. So if you are signing up to these, just being really clear as to what the conversion mechanics are. Next one is the price that it converts. So as I say, typically it's going to be, if it's converting on a funding round, it's going to be at a discount to that funding round, which tends to be between 10 and 20%. But as I mentioned previously, it's probably good to also to have a floor there for the founders, for the existing investors, so you know what you're being, what your level of dilution is going to be. And then, you know, as I say, for a long stop date, or if it's a conversion on a long stop date or a sale, etc., there'll probably be a fixed price in there as to what the conversion price will be. Next one is what class of shares you're going to receive. So if you're wanting to get SEIS and EIS relief, then typically you're investing for ordinary shares. Sometimes, though, it will say that you get the most senior class of shares on that next funding round. So I suppose just if the most senior class on that next funding round is actually a preference share, which isn't SEIS and EIS qualifying, that's just something to be aware of as well, and just making sure that that's worded in the right way. And then, so actually for an ASA, as I said, because it's quite short form, and because it has to be structured in a certain way to make it HMRC eligible, those are kind of tend to be the key things to look out for. But obviously, if it's a convertible loan note, you've got a bit more flexibility. So as well as those points, there'll also be, are you charging interest? You know, what level of that interest is going to be, when is that interest going to be repaid, is it paid, or is it rolled up into the conversion amount, and again, if it's going to convert, who determines if it converts, which party? And then, as I say, more flexibility with a convertible loan note in terms of including investor protections, etc.
Great, thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to just let people know or think about before we move into the Q&A?
Yeah, I suppose that although we've kind of gone through advantages and disadvantages there, I think for ASAs and convertible loan notes, there can still be a place for them. There are still times when they're an appropriate instrument. So as I say, if it's a bridging round, and it's a true bridging round where you do have you're planning that funding round, or there is a milestone in place and that's going to be achieved within the 6 months, and actually this is just to get you to that point, then it can be appropriate. Similarly, they tend to work the best, I suppose, when it's existing investors that are signing up to them, because then they've already done their due diligence into the company. If they're already an investor, they've signed up to these existing investment documents, so they know what terms are applying when they then get the shares, and that also then reflects that it's kind of a true bridging. So I think there is definitely a place where they can be appropriate. It's just making sure that that they're structured correctly if you are going to want those tax reliefs, but then also making sure that you're not using it as an excuse not to do your due diligence, or to know what you're kind of signing up to when it converts. But I don't know if you have any kind of thoughts in terms of your investment experience.
Yes, I was before we did the session, or after we did our preparations, I took a look back at the 35 plus investments that we've done, and I think we've done one ASA, and that was in a company that we had invested in I think twice before. We've been asked to do ASAs more than that, and we have said no to that, and I would not do it with a company that I had never invested in before. It just doesn't sit right with me. That's not everybody's going to feel that way, but that's how I feel about it at the moment. Yeah.
I mean, I think it definitely is a balance between, if it was a company you hadn't invested in before, I suppose still following the same procedure that you would as if it was an equity investment. And then there could be a reason, I suppose, in terms of the kind of financial side. If the discount is really that attractive, and you're already kind of comfortable that you do it as a straight investment anyway, then I mean, there could be reasons why, but completely understand why you sort of feel more comfortable doing it in a company that you've invested in.
Yes. Well, and speaking of discounts, because there was a question on this, what level of discount are you typically seeing these days? I mean, I've seen 10, 15, 20. Is it settling out somewhere or is it all over the place for the companies that you're seeing lately?
Yeah, it does, as I say, does tend to be between 10 to 20. 10 used to be fairly standard. I suppose they're even now at the moment, given kind of market turmoil, and then there is a kind of a bit of going up and down it, but between 10 and 20 feels fairly standard. We don't really see it vary outside of that range.
Right. Okay. And can you remind us of what the long stop dates are for ASAs and CLNs? And also, I think we had a question about whether the long stop date could be extended.
Yeah, so I'm just going to I'll stop sharing my screen now, and then I'll be
great.
able to see you properly. There we go. But for ASAs, the long stop date has to be within 6 months to be SCIS and EIS qualifying. Because of the point I mentioned previously about not varying, in order to be SCIS and EIS qualifying, they can't be varied, then you would be able to extend the long stop date, because essentially that's a variation to the agreement. So if you're looking for those reliefs, then 6 months is the max on the ASA. We have, sometimes though these products ASAs are entered into when you're not claiming those reliefs. So if you weren't trying to claim those reliefs, then obviously there's a bit more flexibility as to what you want the long stop date and variations to be. Convertible loan notes, because you don't have again that HMRC requirement for it to be 6 months, there's more flexibility around that, and it does tend to be commercial negotiation. I've seen them shorter as at sort of 6 months, a year, but then I've seen them longer. And then again, in terms of what I said before about who's triggering the conversion as well can make a difference. Again, it's a point for commercial negotiation, but depending on who you're negotiating with, if you're negotiating with a fund that does tend to be a bit more hard-nosed about these things, they might want to be in the driving seat as to whether it converts or it's repayable. But it's a point of commercial negotiation on that one.
Right, but it's but then it's set in the document, so you have a conversion date in the document.
So your convertible loan note would set out what your conversion events are, what those triggers are, and one of them would typically be a long stop date. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And we had a couple of questions on SAFEs. So first of all, why aren't they EIS eligible?
SAFEs were, I think it was Y Combinator that came up with them, and so it's because they're going to probably have some terms in there which don't align with those HMRC requirements. So if they've got investor protections in there like warranties or consent rights or something around that, then it could mean that it's not EIS eligible. If actually what they've done is taken an typical ASA and just called it a SAFE, then it may still be EIS eligible.
Right. Okay.
But it'll come down to the detail as to what's in there. But generally, when people are talking about SAFE, it's because they've seen it online in terms of the American market. But in the UK, we talk. It's an ASA.
It's an ASA. And I'm guessing that one of those problematic clauses would be some SAFEs have most favored nation clauses, and that would not be, that would be problematic for EIS, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it could definitely be, because obviously a most favored nation clause is saying, okay, you're investing on these terms, but if I enter into an ASA with someone on better terms, I'll give you those terms. And that's varying what you originally entered into. So it's a variation to your original agreement, which obviously means that's not something that HMRC allows in terms of it being SEIS and EIS eligible. So that's definitely, most favoured nations, definitely one to just be wary of.
Yeah. Okay. And do you think, are you seeing more of these vehicles these days? Do you think they're going to be more, especially with the current funding environment where founders are feeling like, they're not necessarily going to get the valuations that they want?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes two ways. I think, potentially there are more in the market at the moment because, valuations are going down, being a bit more investor friendly. So founders, as I say, might want the market to set what the valuation is going to be if they think they can get a better funding, a better valuation. Also, I think just difficulties at the moment in kind of the economy. For some reasons, they might need a bit more bridging to get to the next stage that they're looking at. On the other hand, though, so I think there are probably a lot more happening in the market. I think we sometimes don't see an upside, don't see the kind of increase in that, because, as I say, because they seem to, or at least from the outside, look like simpler documents. People sometimes are more comfortable doing them on their own. I would always say take advice, whether you're the founders or the investors. As I say, there's some definite pitfalls that you could hit, especially if you're looking for the tax relief. So make sure they're done properly. I think, there's also just things to think about when you're putting them in place in terms of for the company, have you gone through all the corporate authorizations that you normally would if you were issuing shares? Because when the ASA converts, you need to be able to issue the shares. So, have you thought about preemption rights and, authority to allot, if you have investor consent matters, to even be entering into these documents? So, yeah, as I say, they kind of seem simpler. And they're definitely, don't get me wrong, I think there's definitely some circumstances where they are appropriate, but you do kind of have to think about them as if it was just a straight equity round, in terms of, so your investors doing your due diligence, what are the documents are going to be that apply when you get your shares? And for the founders, have I ticked off all the things that I need to be doing to be issuing these shares, even though I'm just entering into the ASA at this stage?
Yeah, yes. And we've got several questions now on valuations, which are always tricky.
I might leave some of these to you, Audrey.
I know. It's well, we can bat them around,
Sure.
and maybe Sarah and Simon can wade in. So there's one question on the valuation floor. Is there a risk of setting this higher than incoming investors will agree to? It's just something Sean and I were just discussing earlier today, especially in the current market. So you don't actually manage to get the investment that you need through this vehicle.
Yeah, and I suppose that is the risk. And so for the person who is investing via the ASA, that would be the risk of there being a floor. So I suppose that's the commercial negotiation between the person investing via the ASA wanting just the 10% discount on the funding round, or a set price that they're willing to invest at, versus the founders and existing investors wanting to know how much they're being diluted by. Yeah. There does tend to be a point where people can meet in the middle on that, but that's going to be a part of any commercial negotiation. So I suppose that's the other thing. Sometimes ASAs are seen as we're kicking the valuation question down the road, and it can be a little bit. If you think you're the market, if you're confident that you're going to be able to get at least more than that kind of floor price from the market, but yeah, that's just one of the considerations to think about. I mean, we advise both investors and companies and founders, obviously not on the same documents, but generally our clients are made up of both groups of people, so we can argue that point from either side, but it's one for both sides to think about and just be wary of.
Yeah, it feels to me, and I don't have any stats on this, and again, Sarah and Simon may have a view, but it feels to me like for the pre-pitch screening calls that we do, there are more founders who have not yet decided on their valuations, or who say the valuation will be set by the lead investor, or in discussions with the lead investor. Seems to be the case more frequently these days.
Yeah, which I can understand. But because it's sort of like it's the kind of dragon's den, isn't it? Who goes first in terms of who's putting out there what the starting point is going to be that we negotiate around. And so I can see why a founder wants to maybe push that to the other side if they think they're going to get more. But particularly for kind of early stage companies, valuations can sometimes be a bit of a, you can look at numbers and you can look at comparables, but sometimes it is that a finger in the air kind of, how much equity am I willing to give up versus how much money do I need, and how badly do I need it. So yeah, I think that's always a point to negotiate.
Yeah, and there are a couple of questions on, and Sarah comments, nobody wants to go first, which is very, definitely. And there are some questions on how do you come up with a valuation? Is there a standard formula that people are starting to use, something around AAR plus growth percentage or something like that? Are you seeing any trend at all when it comes to valuations?
Yeah, I suppose that's on the legal side. It's not the kind of side that we get as involved in, but I suppose we're seeing, I mean, just anecdotally, valuations kind of went through the roof for a few years.
Yeah.
And they are coming down slightly. I think the power has shifted more towards the investors, which just tends to happen, I suppose, in a difficult market. But yeah, it does tend to, they do tend to look towards comparables and who else is in their market in terms of valuation when they're looking at what their valuation starting point is going to be.
Yeah. And what Sarah has kindly provided me with the stats, which is that Angel Academe is seeing quite a few flat rounds and down rounds after years of valuation growth, and 5 to 7% ARR is emerging as a metric, but take that with a pinch of salt. So yes, I think it's possible that the days of valuation based on the potential of the company are gone for now.
And I suppose down rounds is, something to be, just to kind of be aware of that could happen in terms of both when you're using an ASA or a convertible. So actually maybe that is if you wouldn't have invested at the current market price or at the last valuation round, is the next valuation with a 10% discount. Actually, even if that ends up being a down round, would you put your money in anyway? That's kind of a bit of a risk that you're taking if you're using that kind of product.
Yeah, very true. And Sarah adds, quality of ARR comes into consideration, speed of customer acquisition, ARR growth, etc. And that's very true. Definitely. I think in general, Angel Academe investors do like to see some kind of traction so that you have that information. For the very early stage companies, of course, you don't. You're taking a risk.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why the SCIS and EIS benefits are so important to otherwise you wouldn't, people probably wouldn't be investing in these early stage businesses unless you're able to spot the next Facebook and Google. There's no guarantees, and so that's why these tax reliefs are so important. And that's why if you are going to go down not the straight equity but go down one of the other structures, it's important to make sure that it's structured in the right way that you still benefit from those.
Yeah. Well, and before the call, we were talking about ways that founders are attempting to avoid down rounds. So have you seen anything other than perhaps using these instruments, any other mechanisms by which they can or they're trying to avoid having down round, having the valuation drop?
Yeah, I mean they're using these mechanisms. Some of them are just looking at kind of alternative ways to fund to get them through to the next point, whether that's loans, etc., grants, are just other alternative forms of funding, maybe being a bit more creative in terms of how they're getting important supplies and things on board, whether that's having giving some equity, looking at those kind of structures. I know so that kind of tends to be what we're seeing more than nothing too creative yet, but that's what we tend to see. I suppose with down rounds as well, as investors, what you have to think about is at what stage the company is in the business. If they've already taken, say, institutional investment, are there potentially some provisions in there in relation to down rounds where actually as ordinary investors you could be doubly impacted because some of them have these kind of anti-dilution clauses where if there is a down round they get an extra issue of shares at nominal value, which could obviously impact doubly on investors who don't hold that class. So that's also just something to think about in terms of your investments.
Yes. Yeah. And another question is, are you seeing, I know that we've participated in some, but are you seeing more debt transactions?
You mean just sort of kind of
people who are looking,
people taking loans?
Yeah.
We see some, we do see some of that. I think it given interest rates at the moment, it's maybe not as attractive. So yeah, so we are seeing some of it, but still, depending on the type of business, lots are still going for investment. But I think the flip side is that the investors are negotiating a lot harder. Terms are, as I say, kind of power shifted slightly to investors. So yeah, they are, if it's institutional, they're looking for preferences, they're looking for anti-dilution rights. They're being a lot stricter around investor consent matters and information rights. You know, they're looking to have more control, because I suppose and also they're doing more due diligence, because I suppose in riskier times they want to be able to take control if they need to, and again, valuations are coming lower.
Yeah, well, from what I understand from other angel networks, Angel Academe is pretty good about a very comprehensive due diligence process. So that's a plus for us. We had a question, and I don't know if you have an answer on this, because I think it varies, but about what's considered and I'm the one who said it anyway, what's considered an early stage company versus seed, Series A, etc. Do you have some delineations that you use?
Yeah, I mean, there's no Oxford Dictionary definition, I suppose,
Right.
and actually it depends on what market you're looking at. So, you know, what we say in the kind of UK market as being seed, early stage, Series A tends to be lower than, say, what they say in the US.
Yeah.
I mean, typically we say kind of seed tends to be up to the million, Series A kind of 1 to 3-ish, and then going up over that. So that tends to be what we talk about when we're looking at those terms, and that sort of just reflects, you know, seed being the friends and family round, the angel investor rounds, Series A being the more institutional rounds, because it tends to be between $1 million plus, where you're getting the funds starting to kind of have a look, and whether that's EIS funds or kind of VC funds, and then going up from there. Yeah,
I think increasingly, what we see on the applications is that a lot of founders think that there's a stage before. I've always thought of seed as the beginning, you know, but a lot of founders seem to think there's a stage before seed, and then seed. So it's
I suppose I think what we see sometimes is kind of friends and family and bootstrapping as being considered kind of pre-seed.
Yeah.
And then, but you know, you'll be kind of surprised that even some of those pre-seed stages have kind of angel investors in there that have put in proper documents in place.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to add pre-seed, seed, and post-seed, and
exactly,
and then everything else.
Well,
we're getting close to time, so I wonder, Emer, would you be able to just give us a very brief recap of when you should use an ASA over priced equity?
So as I say, I think there is a place for these structures, whether it's ASAs or convertible loan notes. Obviously, if you're looking as an investor to have SEIS and EIS funding, then you should be going down the ASA route. And as I say, they make sense where it is a true bridging round because of that 6-month time limit, where it's a true bridging round, typically tending to be from existing investors, because otherwise you've still got to do your due diligence, still got to make yourself familiar with those investment documents that are in place, or maybe putting in place. And they work when it's a true bridging round, where there is a planned funding round within that 6-month window, or some sort of milestone which is going to impact valuation of the business. I think that's the kind of time for them.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Sarah, would you like to come back and wrap us up?
Thank you both very much. That was really helpful. It's quite a dry subject, so great to help you. Great to have you bring it to life for us. So thank you both very much. We are recording this webinar, so if you would like to have a recap on some of that, you'll find it on our YouTube channel And just before I let you go, I just wanted to thank everyone in the audience for joining us, for their questions and their engagement. It was really good to have you. And just some kind of quick next steps. So if you're a founder currently raising investment, then apply to pitch to Angel Academe. We do it all online. So that's so that we can show your applications to our screening committee ASAP. If you are an aspiring or an existing angel investor and would like to come along to an Angel Academe pitch event, please get in contact with Michelle at angelacademe.com. We have got a newsletter, we've got a LinkedIn page, and we have got, as I mentioned, a YouTube channel. I'm just going to copy those links into the chat so that you can use them. But thank you all very much again for listening, and we will see you next time.